Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online. And once again, we're going to be continuing along here in the Peaceful Solution. If you haven't got it yet, try to get it as soon as possible. It's our Peaceful Solution Character Education Parenting Manual. And of course, they're available in Spanish and in English right now. And some people have been asking, do we have classes available in Spanish? The answer is yes. In fact, you can actually, if you have someone that's wanting to take the classes in Spanish, we actually have them uploaded to YouTube. And we also can set you up with teachers out of Mexico who can actually teach these classes with you also. We have teachers here at the headquarters, but they are extremely busy, as you can imagine. But we do have many teachers available that can teach. And if you're wanting it in another language, please let us know, because we're trying to get these things out as soon as possible. And we'll send you the book. If you don't have it, we'll send it to you, PDF version. We'll email it to you. We can send it through WhatsApp. But we'll make it readily available so you have it. This is for anyone that is ever planning to be a parent, or even if you're not planning to be a parent, you never know when that might come. I've been a parent many times over, so it's something that, you can set out in your life and say, I think I'll wait till I'm in my late 20s or early 30s. And if you're like me, you became a father at 19. So it didn't really work to my late 20s or early 30s, but someone said that was a mistake doing that so young. I tell you, it's the best mistake I ever made. And it wasn't a bad choice. If it was a mistake, it's the best one I ever made. Because it definitely is it's a benefit. And what really helped me was I grew up with this program, and I contribute everything that took place in my life as a parent, being young and growing up and having this program readily available. It wasn't put in book format yet, but there were Peaceful Solution classes being taught at that time, back in the early 90s, and it helped myself, my wife, it helped my whole family tremendously. And that's what made it really a joy to be able to take hold of the challenges, because at 19 you're still growing up. You're not growing up at all. You still got a long way to go yourself. If you'll be turning over to lesson plan page 2A, we're going to rehearse some of the last things that David covered and go over a little bit of the that's part of the procedures to rehearse the chapter before. And of course, by now I'm sure you've learned this book can be challenging when it comes to procedures, and you have to make sure that you take and you put your procedures throughout your book. In the parenting manual, what I do is I write the procedure right on the page where the procedure starts, because you'll have procedures start in the middle of the page, at the bottom of the page, not like the junior high series or the Building More Excellence unit, to where you kind of got a fresh start on every page with a procedure. No, this actually, you can have, you'll see when we get into this, you'll have procedure 6, 7, and 8 all on page 12. So we'll get into that, and I'll tell you where to mark it, but make sure this is something that when you teach this, you definitely want to pre-read it, or else you'll be so lost in your procedures you won't even know where you're supposed to be, and it will get really confusing. But if you read over it, you'll find out it's really simplistic, and everything flows very well. And of course, when you're talking about parenting classes, you're going to have a lot of engaging conversation with people. And, this book wasn't published back when I first became a parent, but being a parent and, having children many times over, you learn that this book, even though you might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children, whatever you might have, this book is priceless to what it can help you add. So you can say that, well, I am a parent. I figured it all out. I got it all done. Still, if you have children, get this book for them, because this book is priceless as a parent. It helps you through things that can help you prevent things. It can help you have foresight, setting your mind in advance, helping you control the influences and the peer pressure that we're getting to tonight, that we're going to be putting on our own children. And we might not even recognize how we're doing that. But that's what we're faced with. And we'll get into a lot of those things tonight. And of course, thinking of, as a parent, we think, well, you have a baby. But I want you to consider, for those of you, there's a lot of people that have never had a child, but you can imagine this. If you haven't, imagine something, everybody's got one of these, right? It's almost like more important than a heart these days to live. You got to have a cell phone. And I'll be the first one I think I'm at like right around 532 messages so far today. So I get a lot. So I understand how important phones can be on an international scale. But imagine if you've never had a child, imagine getting your cell phone. And then you get a new cell phone. What do you have to do? Well, I got to add all of my apps. I got to put all these things in here. So you have to make it work for you. Well, imagine a child, if you've never had one. If you've had one, then you'll start to understand, or you already know, a child is a life form that has nothing. You have to put these things inside of it. And as in previous classes has taught, this starts before the child even leaves the womb. As the child is being formed in the womb, this education process starts. And of course, go all the way back to the character unit in chapter 1 at the very beginning where we talked about genetics. Well, we have some traits are fixed and some are not fixed. And think about what we're doing for our children and how we're doing these things for our children and the things that we lay out for our children. Because all of these things will be very important as we go through these lessons and as you talk, because everybody's got their own opinion of what they want their children to do. Some people will tell you that I have no problem with my child playing video games. He behaves well, so I allow him to play an hour of video games every day. And of course, remember, everything is a teaching tool. So I always ask, well, what video games are you kind of letting your child play? Because the things that we do, the things that we put into our minds, as we talked about going through the self-control unit, where the section on monkey see, monkey do, what we take into our minds is not readily seen in our actions. It builds up. And sometimes it takes a little bit of determination to build up I don't want to use a positive word for a negative action, but to build up the energy, so to speak, the mindset to where I'm going to do this. I'm a man of my own now. I'm going to do it. Well, how long did it take before that mindset started? And think about, once again, a very young child can't walk, can't talk, can't even eat on its own. If you didn't feed it, it would starve to death. So think about how much that life needs to be taken care of. And all of you sitting in this auditorium and watching online, I've heard people say, my parents were horrible. I can't say that. My parents were really great. But I've heard people say their parents were horrible. My mom and dad never cared, didn't care whether I live or died. Well, they had to care somewhat, or somebody in your life did, because you're sitting here in this class today. So also remember that a lot of times if you had a life growing up with a lot of negative substance coming from your parents, most likely they were never taught how to be a parent. And it's very important that if you've went through negative things in your life growing up as a child from the guardians or the parents that were supposed to oversee you or teach you and guide you and lead you, they always say you should never raise your hand to your child, and a child should never raise their hand to their father or their mother. And sadly, we live in a society where, children will fight their fathers, fathers will fight their children, they'll name calling, and all of these things take place in our society. And it's more prevalent than you think, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it all starts in the very beginning, as we're going to cover here. So looking at this, Lesson Plan 2, effective parenting begins with character. And our purpose and objective for this section will be parents will explore the great responsibility of parenting and how negative influences affect children's character. They will also learn the importance of acknowledging parenting mistakes in order to find solutions. So once again, every parent is going to make mistakes. And very quickly remind yourself, the Building More Excellence unit on page 129, the difference between a mistake and a bad choice. There's a big difference between making a mistake and a bad choice. In fact, one of the examples that we give on page 129 of the Building Moral Excellence unit is that a mistake is accidentally using salt instead of sugar when cooking or even in your coffee. A bad choice would be going out, being promiscuous, and then getting pregnant. And people want to say, I got pregnant by mistake. Well, no, if you do certain things, then you get certain results. It might not be every time, but that is something that could take place. Well, the materials we need here is the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, Parenting Manual, and pencils and pens. And someone asked recently, do we have a student's manual? We have the parenting manual, and it is one manual. There's not a student or a teacher. A parent is a parent. So we've done them all as teacher manuals for the fact that a lot of parents buy these and they read them. We have people that buy these books, and we didn't really readily have classes available to them. We have a lot of people. This program is very popular with CPS, Child Protective Services. In fact, we have a lot of people that will be watching this class, has been watching these classes, and they're required by court to watch these classes. So all of the procedures are in here because once we teach these classes, it's great to go back and go through this program again, to rehearse it, and to learn to teach it. Teach these things to your children. Get a group of parents together in your community. They're doing that right now in other countries. They're getting communities together. There's a lot of countries to where there's single mothers. 80% of the women are single mothers. And imagine being left in that position. Well, there's a lot of people getting together using these books. And of course, so the procedure is in every book. But here in procedure 1, it says, briefly review lesson 1, so you're going to be a parent by asking the following questions. And the first one is, why is it so important for a pregnant woman to receive prenatal care? And I want to look back over to page 1, because that's where we talked about it. On page 1, it says, prenatal care, a woman's physical needs. And it says, as soon as you realize you're pregnant, it's very important to become educated on all you need to know all you need to know beneficial for yourself and the baby. Whatever you choose, it is important to seek this care as early as possible so that you can receive guidance and advice throughout your pregnancy. And one thing that people have to readily, see is once you learn you're pregnant, if you're someone that consumes alcohol, even on a minimal basis, there's nothing inappropriate about drinking small amounts of alcohol. We've talked about that before, and the abuse of alcohol is very different. But when you're pregnant, you might want to look at it a little differently. Some people smoke. It's already unhealthy to begin with, but a lot of people will stop when they find out they're pregnant for their pregnancy. But as we'll talk about a little bit more tonight, you can still affect the child by continuing on with these inappropriate behaviors, things that bring your own health down even after your child is born. And once again, I'm speaking about the abuse of alcohol and doing things that bring down your own body. Well, it says, whatever you choose, it is important to seek this care as early as possible so that you can receive guidance and advice throughout your pregnancy. Proper prenatal care can help you stay healthy and help your baby to grow strong and be delivered safely. Now, notice once again, throughout your pregnancy, you should eat moderate amounts of healthy foods. This does not mean eating for two. Your diet should consist of protein, carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, fats, vitamins, and minerals. It is important to eat a well-balanced diet. Fruits and vegetables are a must for development of your baby's skin, bones, and eyes. Iron-rich foods such as liver and greens are also beneficial. Try to drink sufficient water each day. Many women find drinking 1 to 4 cups of red raspberry tea every day to be very beneficial. They are beneficial supplements you can take, such as calcium and iron also. But once again, looking over here to page 2 at the very top of the page, I want you to see the very bottom sentence here. Well, let's just read the whole paragraph. It's short. It says, changes such as moderate weight gain, minor fatigue, and skin changes such as acne are normal. Other changes such as severe cramping or pain Moderate to heavy bleeding and excessive swelling of hands and feet should not be ignored. Notice, seek advice on any changes that you are unsure or uneasy about. And when we say seek this advice, some people have midwives, some people have physicians. Whatever you have chosen to do in your pregnancy as a mother, and also including the father in this, then that's your choice. We're not telling you to self-medicate when you're pregnant. We're not giving medical advice. We're telling you what has been proven, information given from many, many, many years, and also parents that were involved, things that helped them. But the Peaceful Solution also encourages you, seek information with your midwife, seek guidance from your midwife or your physician. Whatever it is you've chosen to do in your pregnancy, make sure you seek that and be very mindful that you're growing a child inside of you. Never take anything lightly if you're suffering from anything or you feel as though there's something not going right in your body. You know, this parenting manual will guide you on how to do things and the best things for you, but it doesn't give medical advice. We encourage you to seek that medical advice from whichever situation, whichever is available. I know there's some people that only have midwives. When you go into foreign countries, I know in Kenya, we have a lot of people over there that have midwifery. Even out here in Texas, midwifery is very popular, and people prefer that instead of going to a medical physician. I know people that have went to midwives and medical physicians. They've done both. So just make sure whatever it is you seek to do, be diligent with doing it. Looking back over here to lesson plan 2, page 2A, in procedure 1, question B, it says, what are some of the physical needs of newborns? And of course, you're going to see here food, clothing, shelter, and, lots of love. And lots of love doesn't mean, daily picking them up and kissing them all over. Some people confuse that. I tell you, and I started to bring the article, but if you're teaching these classes, look it up for yourself, because sometimes these things seem like, there's no possible way. Google this for yourself if you're a parent, if you're going to teach a parenting classes, if you have a child, if you're a grandparent and you have your grandchild in your care. It is very common for a child to contract herpes from people just kissing all over the baby. And when you Google it, you will see how many times this takes place. It is enormous. So make sure you understand lots of love means food, clothing, and shelter. Taking care of its basic needs, not everybody passing the child around the room and everybody donating saliva to the child. Make sure you keep in mind that part of loving the child is protecting it from any kind of disease that it could encounter. And it is extremely common. And when you search it, you're going to find that it is, in fact, the first article, it was the second article that came up was a baby got it from a priest at baptism. It was being baptized, the priest kissed it, and the priest had a herpes sore on his lip, and the child ended up with herpes. So when I say be careful who kisses your child, I mean everybody. Don't think anybody's above having some kind of disease that can pass on. Protect your child well. But looking over here to page 6, and of course, David covered a lot of these things where it talks about your new baby. And here at the very bottom paragraph of that section, it says the physical needs of a baby include being fed, kept warm and clean, and being given comfort and emotional support. That's not asking much, but it will take a lot of time and effort on your part. This is also a vital time for building on the foundation of a positive character you have been teaching your child since it was in the womb. And once again, look here at the feeding the baby, because this is very important to understand. And when we teach these, there's some words we usually don't use when we're having a mixed company class. There's a lot of education we offer concerning STDs and parenting. And we even offer what the world would call sex education, but we don't offer the X-rated version. We offer the educated version. We offer the version that teaches a person how to avoid the curveballs and pitfalls. So there's certain terminology that we use here. And of course, in this section, we talk about breastfeeding. And we say here, and this is a proven fact, it is the most natural way for a woman to feed her baby. And of course, the mother's milk is the most easily digestible or digested substance a baby can eat. It also helps to build a bond of love, a connection between you and your baby. Of course, feeding this way provides antibodies and boosts the baby's immune system. Now think about that, getting natural antibodies. Why is that so important? There was an article that just came out this last week showing that colon cancer has been traced, and they're tracing it back and seeing that a lot of things that are leading to this disturbance in the gut microbiome, one of them is from taking antibiotics, that it disturbs the gut microbiome, it puts everything out of whack, and as the body tries to realign itself, that a lot of antibodies and other things have disturbed that environment that needs to be healthy. Well, this is one way that we can start off the child to being healthy. They had it out at one time that colon cancer and other cancers are hereditary. But it was just released in the news last month that most people that are getting these cancers are first generation people getting them. They're not people that had generation before then. Now, I'm not saying that they're not still having, cancers from one generation to the next, but a lot of it has to do with how we care for ourselves or our children. Our bodies can only do for us what we do for it. And we have to be mindful. And of course, now we talk about these antibodies and boosting the immune system of the baby. That's saying that the mother is taking care of herself and giving herself the things she needs to eat. Very important that the mother is doing that also. Now, feeding babies this way, the babies that are fed this way are almost never constipated. So their digestive system is working well. The natural way of feeding also can help you to lose the extra baby weight gain and return your body to its pre-pregnancy weight. If you're unable to naturally feed, you can consider another form. Seek advice on what is best for your little one. Talk to your midwife, talk to your physician. Of course, remember the bottles. You and your spouse must decide what is best for you and your baby. If you're unsure, it's always best to ask. There are a number of alternatives available. And I know it can be scary, people that choose to use formula, because it seems like every time you look in the news, there's something contaminated in baby formula. That is extremely common. So if you can at all do it, try to use the natural way, or at least get that natural nutrition. And there's ways that you can also, and you can seek these from your midwife, the guidance and the details from your midwife or from your physician, but you can naturally store this stuff. You can put it into bottles or so forth if you're able to do so. I personally would try to go above and beyond to do a natural feeding before any other feeding. I have just seen too many times as a parent to where you can have formula in your cabinet, and lo and behold, that formula comes out in the news as don't use it. And sometimes it can be like, I see bags of salad that came out here not long ago, and it said, if you have this in your refrigerator, don't use it. And it was 3 months old. I don't know how many people would still have a bag of salad in the refrigerator 3 months after they bought it. You've either consumed it by then or you've thrown it out. But once again here, it says if you are naturally feeding, it is not necessary to supplement your baby with solid foods for at least the first 4 months. Many babies will not desire solid food until 8 or 9 months. Some basic first foods for babies include mashed potatoes, carrots, oatmeal, green peas, bananas, applesauce, and other soft fruits. So all of these things, even though we're talking about how the child is cared for, we're talking about how to love a child. We're talking about how to truly care for the child. And once again, it's much more than, you get this beautiful little baby room and you get these little Disney themes going through the room or whatever theme that you're putting in it. And of course, everybody oohs and ahs over the beauty of the baby's room, and that's love. No, that's not love at all. You can have a baby and it can have a homemade crib that, something that most people wouldn't dare use. and you think about, just 100 years ago, we didn't have Disney rooms and all this fancy stuff. In fact, we went through a lot when we were going out with the Peaceful Solution teaching in schools. We had a lot of student teachers traveling with us, and we always went to museums. And there was a lot of things that you could see from the 1800s that was used for babies. And a lot of the baby mattresses were like rawhide stuffed with hay. And it looked uncomfortable as can be. And the baby carriages looked just as uncomfortable as you could imagine. And then there was some that were stuffed with feathers and so forth. But it was amazing how we've went from just stuff that was extremely simplistic to now people think they need these $10,000 baby rooms. But you don't need those things. You don't need them at all. And it's not going to make you a more successful parent. It will make you go more in debt, but it won't make you a more successful parent. And of course, here also notice, allow your newborn to sleep as long as he or she likes. Be ready to adjust to the difference, because his or her sleeping and eating patterns will not be like yours. One thing as a parent, if you like going to bed and getting up when you want to do that, you can kiss that bye. That goes away, and this is part of showing love. You can't just sit in there, we'll put the baby on the other side of the house and just let it cry. It'll cry itself to sleep. No, usually when a baby cries, there's something wrong. That's when it's trying to alert you that it needs something. And when you think about this, I had many, many nights setting up to 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to convince someone to go to sleep, and they seemed like they were more wide awake than they were during the daytime. I was, and I remember going to work, and I worked a piece work. I got paid by the piece at that time. You didn't get paid by the hour. You got paid by the amount you did. And I remember going to work. I was ready just to go to bed. I didn't want to go to work because I had to get up at 5 o'clock to go to work. And the child doesn't really understand you got to go to work. It sleeps half the day. That was probably part of the problem, sleeping at night. But, as life went on, it really helps when you have children, make it a team effort. In other words, the father can help some, but also the other children can help some. And that's one thing that's really helped me personally in my life was when the children got older, you didn't even have to ask them. They got involved in helping with doing things. And of course, a family is a unit working together. And these really takes some of the stress off. And I'm not saying have 5 children so the older ones can help with the younger ones, but, be ready to assist, be ready to help when possible. Don't put everything on one person. Try to be an assistant. And then if everything is on one person, because I know there's a lot of single parents, and I know it's possible for these things to be done, but if a woman is taking care of her child, don't go put a lot more stuff on her and burden her and say, well, you were working 9 hours a day to begin with. You need to still be working 9 hours now. That's possible, but it's not possible the day after she has the baby. So have a little bit of, care and compassion, but it's also important for the woman to keep up and be moving too. So that helps a lot also, because the woman can't just lay in the bed and recover and the child lays in its bed. So there's a lot of things together that works. But once again, we're talking about how we show love to a child, and it's not just the kissing, the holding, and the bouncing on the knee. It says here, typically newborns will wake up and eat and then go back to sleep. And I know that's some people's dreams to be able to do that. As the day and the weeks go by, the baby will begin to sleep less. Dress your baby warmly for sleep. A footed sleeper works best so that he or she does not have many blankets on or around him or her. Keep his or her room warm, but not too warm. Rotate his or her sleeping position each time you put her down to prevent her skull from flattening, because the bones in her head are still very soft. And I read that because I've seen that take place, where you have a newborn and you always put them on their back and the child's head will go completely flat. So you literally have to pay attention when you're placing your child in the bed to rotate your child and to be mindful of it. And if you don't know that, you would think that, that's something must be wrong with my child. Or you would think that, well, that's just normal for everybody to have a flat back of the head. If you've never experienced dealing with a newborn, when a child is first born, its head is like mush. You could do this to it. It's not very firm at all. It's extremely soft. And as it enters into the world, and over a period of time, it strengthens and becomes solidified. But you have to be very mindful when dealing with that you're taking care of everything. And that means even the rotation and keeping track of that child as it's sleeping to make sure you're placing it in the bed. It can't really, we like to roll over when we sleep, but a child can't readily do that. So think about that also. And of course, and then David covered the holding your baby, the bathing, and of course, diaper changing. And I know as a man, that's not a very desired thing. It's never a desired thing. I always tried to find 1,001 reasons on why I couldn't do it. But, it has to be done. And you think about, here it says changing the baby as soon as possible every time he or she either urinates or has a bowel movement. It's extremely important to do that. And that, once again, is showing love. You can't just let it lie in its waste. And you think about what occurs to the skin. If you do that, it's just horrendous what takes place to the baby. And you can actually create an enormous amount of problems by not being diligent by doing these things. And then, of course, here the crying. Notice it says some think that it's impossible to differentiate between a baby's cries, but most parents learn quickly how to do this. It's important to remember that babies do not cry without a reason. So, and it could be something simple. It could be a soiled diaper. It could be that it's hungry. It could be many things, but make sure to check on it. That doesn't mean every time a baby cries, you need to pick it up. And those of you that have had children realize that's a very bad idea, because when it wants to be picked up and played with, it will cry because it knows, hey, crying gets you to come. It's amazing what you can do with anything. The author of The Peaceful Solution, I'll tell you this because this just goes to show what you can do with a child. He showed me how you can train fish to come. When you go to feed them, they will come up to the shore to meet you. And they will all wait there, just like a dog or a cat will. And he trained a lot of us to do that. And I got to where I decided, I want to do that and show my children. So now they go to the edge of a pond. They say it's time to eat, and here come all the fish. But the fish, it's not that they're listening to your voice. They know that sound means food's coming right here. So you always go to the same spot, and you throw the food in the same area. But you make sure they all come before you throw it. And they understand your sound of your voice as it vibrates through the water, so they come. So if a fish can do that, a human baby sure can figure out how to get things done through cries. And of course, there's certain things that they know they can do if they need something. And, if it's soiled itself, if, I seen one time that wasn't anything. I seen it. It wasn't my child, but I seen it. Anybody could do this. Where a person accidentally was putting on a diaper, a cloth diaper, and they stuck the pin through a small part of the child's skin. And the child screamed and screamed and screamed, and nothing looked that bad. And then it come time, we'll check the diaper on the child. And they realized they'd stuck the pin through a small part of the child's flesh, and that's what it was crying over. The parent didn't mean to do that. And the way it kind of worked out, the parent was a new parent, just learning how to do these things. And of course, they had to learn, this is something I got to be mindful of. So stick your hand underneath it when you put it in. If you're going to stick anybody, stick yourself first. And these are things that all of these things we just talked about are showing true love for a child. And then, of course, going back here to Lesson Plan 2, page 2A, why is it important for newborns' physical needs to be met properly? Notice here we have to help the baby grow properly and to develop a healthy mind. And once again, that development starts while the child's still in the womb, as the study from New Zealand showed. And here in D, it says, how can a mother's behavior affect the character development of an unborn child? Notice it says babies can hear and learn in the womb. So a mother must guard her words, actions, and environment. If you're going to the nightclub pregnant is not what you should be doing. Going and doing anything foolish that could bring harm to yourself, someone else, that includes your pregnant child, or the environment. That means what you're bringing it up in. All of these things should be avoided because it's negative character. If you can bring harm or damage to yourself, someone else, or the environment, these are things that we must guard against. Now, looking here to procedure 2, it says explain to class that in today's lesson they will continue learning what effective parenting consists of. We will analyze the deception and traps that society has fallen into, and we'll learn how to recognize and avoid them. We will look at the traits of effective parents as well as common mistakes in parenting and their solutions. And so you want to just briefly discuss that with the parents. And of course, you're going to get a lot of feedback from parents. And you'll hear things with this feedback. Make sure you allow only a certain time for the feedback. Otherwise, when you have a parenting class, it's a little bit different than teenagers. A parenting class, you'll have a student take over the class and you can just close your book. But they're there to go through the book. So make sure you allow appropriate time, 2 or 3 minutes for an explanation or somebody to give input, and then continue on through the class. Because even though this book is fairly short, it's very detailed. And you can get into conversations in the very beginning that are covered in depth in the middle and end of the book. So make sure you take it as the book allows it to come. Same as the junior high and the Building More Excellence unit, don't get ahead of yourself when teaching it. And here in procedure 3, it says, ask the question on page 11. What do you think is the most important job on the planet? Give students time to ponder and write down their answers. And once again, doesn't have to be parents. This can be taught. This really should be taught to young men and women who want to even get married, who are even leaving high school. This should be part of a curricula taught for coming into the world, even if you don't plan on having children. This is something where people should be educated so they realize that whenever they get pregnant, if they get pregnant, that's a life inside of them. It's not an option. It's a life. It's not something that, I got to get rid of this. Well, always remember, let these words ring in your ears. And it's a quote from the author of The Peaceful Solution. If it's not alive, why do you have to kill it? So part of educating young men and women is letting them know if you commit these actions, you can bring forth this life. And who has to answer for the lack of responsibility if the two people aren't interested? Well, I'll give it to my mom and my dad. But it's still a life. Whatever you do with it, it's still a life, and it has to be nurtured and brought up, as we're speaking about here. But we're talking about effective parenting, and if we would educate everyone through what we've talked about in the junior high series and on into the Building More Excellence unit and into this unit, you wouldn't have people considering getting rid of the child. Just terminate it. The father going, well, I guess it's yours. See you later. Nice knowing you. If these things were taught, we could actually eliminate that. We could completely eliminate that. But here it says, give students time to ponder and write down their answers on the lines provided. Allow volunteers to give their answers. Have students turn to page 11 and read the first paragraph. Emphasize the definition of parenting. So turning over here to page 11, and you see here where lesson 2, effective parenting, begins with character. And of course, you see parenting is a job, and the prerequisite is a positive character. And of course, a prerequisite is a thing that is required as a prior condition for something to take place or exist. So it's something that needs to be there. So what do you think is the most important job on the planet? That's the question. You ask the students in your class, let them fill that out, and give a little bit of time for people to share what they've written down. Those who want to share, people can participate, but make sure, let them raise their hands and volunteer to be part of giving what they've written down. Some people can write down some pretty private things, so make sure to let people volunteer for that. And continuing on here, it says, parents are responsible for raising another person from a state of total helplessness and dependency to a mature adult with positive character who is respectful, responsible, and compassionate toward others. And once again, the definition of parenting that we're told here to make sure we go over this with our class, caring or nurturing a child or children by providing for their physical and emotional needs. You know, when you think about how fast a child develops, it's really astounding how fast a child goes from laying in a crib. All it can do is cry if it wants something, can't talk, can't walk, to being able to walk, talk. I've met children that can read by the age of 2. I've met children that can speak multiple languages by the age of 3. It's astounding what a child can do and how fast it can absorb knowledge in. But it's also astounding of how fast it can absorb negative things in. If it can absorb knowledge in, it's up for the parent to guard their child from taking in negative things. I know parents really like to, there's so many cartoons and these things are educational. Well, define education for one, and then is the education that's being offered in your programming positive or negative? I'm not saying that it's all negative, because it's not. There's a lot of positive programming that offers education. But be mindful what your child is learning. Be mindful of what your child's being taught by the TV you're putting it in front of. You know, a lot of parents like to play these things when the child's laying in the crib. I know a lot of parents that will play many different things for their child because it's going into the child's mind. And there can be many different forms of education. You know, I know some people like to play nursery rhymes are huge whenever children are young, and they want to get these things into their minds. And of course, music plays a huge part into this. When you learn to say your ABCs, you know, you learn to sing it. And that's one way. And that's why you should be mindful of the music that you allow your child to hear, because music is it's a way of teaching. It helps us put a rhythm to words and the words to memory. So be mindful. You know, never take it lightly what you allow in your child's presence, especially at a young age, because it's going to be part of that development. And once again, who do you think is the most important job? What do you think is the most important job on our planet? And then who? It's you as a parent or a guardian. And of course, what you allow to go into your child's mind. It's not just what goes into your child's mouth, but what goes into your child's mind. Notice here on page 11, it says negative influences can destroy a person's way of thinking and being. Now imagine if you start doing that before it's 2 years old, just feeding the negativity in. And once again, it's not a rare thing to see a child doing really miraculous things at 2 and 3 years of age. Walking, reading, speaking multiple languages. I've seen children playing piano extremely well at 4. It's amazing how fast a child's mind absorbs knowledge in those first 5 years. Because as an adult, you can try to do the very same thing and it becomes extremely difficult, because our minds are bombarded with enormous amounts of just everyday life coming in and going out. Where a child its world's pretty small, and it grows as it allows this new knowledge to come into its mind. And as a parent, once again, you have to guard against this negative influence, because it's developing, it's growing. You know, and you can think of it as a garden if you want to, whatever you can think of it, the most precious thing that you want to take care of, you know, and then imagine somebody dumps a little poison into it. A little poison can go a long way in damaging a child's mind. It can go a long way in damaging adults' minds. But a child's mind is not as prepared as an adult mind should be. Not that it is, but that it should be. And if a child went through this program growing up as an adult, it would be very well prepared. Continuing on, it says, they too fall prey to negative influences. So it's no exaggeration when we say parenting is a tough job. You know, David gave some examples when he was talking about things that parents do, and, you know, put the outlet covers on, you got the locks for the cabinet doors, you got all of these things. And, you know, you give a child enough time, it'll figure out how to break all of those things and get past all of those things. And, you know, you got to wonder, For some reason, child sees a hole in the wall and, well, let's stick that in there and see what that'll do, And that's why, that's why houses have to be wired a certain way. That's why there's breakers, and that's why if you have water around electrical outlets, there has to be a certain breaker for that. It's not a normal breaker. Not that just children do it, but it is part there to help a child. But once again, there's certain things that we do to protect these children because they don't readily know why. They see mom stick the vacuum cleaner in the outlet. Well, she did that and she did something, so let me try this and see what takes place. They don't exactly know what's going to occur when they do it. But continuing on here, it says, our knowledge, values, and character and experiences all play a role in how we train and how we affect our children. And remember, all the way back to page 6 of the character unit, our values. That's something we deem to be important. And as a parent, as someone with a newborn, that should be the most important thing in your life outside of taking care of yourself first. I always think about this like they say on an airplane. In case the mask drops down, put yours on first and then place the one on the child beside of you. If you don't take care of yourself as a parent, you'll never take care of your child. And go all the way back to the second chapter of the respect unit, having self-respect. If you don't respect yourself, you'll never respect anyone else. So we have to make sure we're taking care of ourselves first. And that means continuing our education, doing what is right, practicing positive character, eating healthy, living a healthy life, making sure we're aware of the positive and negative influences that come into our life and avoid those curveballs and pitfalls. Then we can actually help our child. But we can't neglect ourselves and then help our child. It's the old adage of when you're sitting there and you're smoking your cigarette and telling your child, don't you ever start smoking. I've heard parents say, I will beat you if you ever start smoking as they smoke. And it's like, well, that ain't going to get anywhere. I'm going to get a beating for doing I wonder if his dad beat him when he was doing it, But, that's the it's the same thing. Doing drugs, excessive drinking, sitting in front of a TV all day long and then yelling at your child for watching YouTube on his phone or her phone as you sit in front of the TV the whole day. My generation grew up with the TV and this generation grew up with the internet. Well, if you're going to do that in front of your children, and if you think you're going to do it and they don't know it, that's like parents that put the TV in the bedroom and they watch it at night so the children don't know, but you can hear in a quiet house the TV going everywhere. If you're going to tell your child not to do it and you explain to them the reason why they shouldn't do it, you should be following those same instructions yourself. You don't want to be telling your child that you shouldn't do it, then for it to come out later that, no, I guess it's okay. Once you get older, you must be able to do it. No, if it's negative when you're a child, it's negative when you're an adult. Negative is negative. Now, there are certain things that require age limits for you to be able to do things, but if something brings harm to yourself, someone else, or your environment as a child, the same as an adult. It works both ways. Continuing on, it says, we also live in a society where we are literally bombarded with negative influences, violence, aggression, and sexual promiscuity. Vulgar language and jokes are practically everywhere and come into our homes through all forms of media, television, radio, magazines, and the internet. And go back and rehearse the 4th chapter of the self-control unit, and the 5th chapter, actually, with all of this entertainment and these sexual innuendos. And, we talked about movies in the Building More Excellence unit when I think we talked about The Matrix and Star Wars and how many acts of violence there are. And that was in 2005, I think, 2003, 2005. And now they've got movies that we talked about, this John Wick series, where someone gets murdered every 1 minute and 58 seconds. And that's not something that you want your children watching. And, I was reading about, because I was curious, how can you sell the same movie 5 times? Because I've seen a 5th one's coming out now. And I'm like, how can you sell the same idea 5 times? And I thought, well, how many iPhones have I bought? Same phone like 10 times. So, as a society, we tend to want to do it. And I was reading, and the actor, who I'll leave his name out, he said that what made him want to do a 5th movie was the new ideas behind how people were going to be murdered, the killing. He said it's going to be ways that the movie industry has never seen. And he was really excited about it. And I thought, man, and this is something that we're supposed to get excited over. And no one was excited about the mass shooting in Texas today. That was looked at as a negative thing. But we get excited when it's taking place on the movies. And then we wonder why. This is part of being a parent, that you're careful of what you let your children get into their mind. And I know a lot of parents these days take the cell phone, put it right beside the baby's head, and they'll play things on their cell phone. Be mindful what you're playing to your child. Be very mindful of it. Never underestimate the power of an influence. And that's what we talked about in the character unit from page 58 to page 60. And we stress that. Never underestimate the power of an influence and what it can have, especially on a mind that is developing. And remember, I know William and Catan talked about this. A mind of a young man doesn't really get to the point of full development until you're 26 years old. And I kind of laugh because I'm double that age, and mine still, I think, hasn't got to the full potential of developing yet. Because I'm 52, and I still have a long way to go myself. And I've been offered the best educational program a person can have. And I'm still learning every day how to fix, not just problems, but how to fix things in my own life and how to do things in a more proper way. And, education is continual. There's never a time to where you learned it all and it's time to just tell everybody else what to do. You'll never get to that point. But here it says, before the invention of television, immorality was not as prevalent. And, the author of The Peaceful Solution, who was born in 1934, spoke a lot about this, on how dress codes, people dressed, and he always used the example that nobody ever seen grandma's ankles but grandpa, and how people would dress. They were very modest in how they dressed. And, of course, then when these shows came out from Hollywood, they started revealing a little bit, the arms started coming up, and the tops started going down, and the skirts started coming up. And in today's society, I wouldn't even define what they wear as clothes anymore. I've been to countries where women are literally walking down the street with what they call pasties. It's not clothes, it's stickers. And that's what they're wearing. And that's supposed to be popular. And it's the most bizarre thing you'd even think about seeing. And I'll tell you something that this is something that when I say guard your children, guard them well, one of the first things when we took students to Washington, D.C., and myself, William, Catan, Jeff, and David, we've been in Washington, D.C. many times, met with many dignitaries, and we've always had children with us most of the time. I think there's one time I went, there was no children, but every other time we had a lot of children. And every building you're going into, whether you're going into the U.S. Supreme Court, walking in front of the Library of Congress, there's nudity everywhere. I mean, adult nudity and children. In fact, if you were to have the same thing, it would be defined as child pornography. And if you've ever traveled to places like Rome, nudity is everywhere. It's in the paintings. It's in the statues. It's all over the place. So be mindful what you want to go in your child's mind. And it was very difficult trying to take children into meetings and take them seriously when you have naked men and women standing outside the building statues. Because you've already instructed and taught that's immoral. That's negative. Shouldn't be done. But these are not cheap statues. This is a lot of money's been poured into this. In fact, in the Library of Congress, I think they're bronze, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a fountain that runs the whole time. But everything in there is just exposing nudity. And I mean complete nudity. Nothing left to the imagination. I tell you what, just imagine if you were to put the same statues in your front yard that the Library of Congress has. Well, what do you think would take place? I bet you the city would come down on you. You would get all kinds of fines. Somebody'd show up to your house. You can't have this stuff in your front yard. Well, I seen it at the Library of Congress. I thought it'd be great for my family too, let everybody see it. Well, it's not great because deep down inside they know it's immoral. But sometimes tradition overrides common sense. But think about that. if you're part of a group or teachers that's going to Washington, D.C. to take children, prepare yourself for it. Because our first time, we went as adults, and we had no children with us, so we were prepared for it. But if we had had children with us when we first went there, I would have been shocked because I didn't expect that. Even though I kind of knew it from going through school, it's very different standing there and seeing these mega statues and what it's showing. It's just something that shouldn't exist in a moral world. Continuing on here, it says, immorality can be defined as a lack of morality, an immoral act or practice, not discerning between right and wrong, teaching a concept of negative behavior, doing or saying something that brings harm to self, others, and the environment. And you can remember all the way back to page 8 where we have that rectangular box and that dividing line that determines what is right and what is wrong. In that one page of the Peaceful Solution, you could spend a whole class just teaching that one page and going over and getting those 3 basic concepts, in your mind and in the mind of your students. But also as a parent, you want to make sure you recall back, determining, what determines what is right or wrong. And it comes down basically and very simplistically, does it bring harm to myself? Does it bring harm to the environment? Or does it bring harm to someone else? And that's something we have to consider. And if the answer is doesn't bring harm to myself, doesn't bring harm to someone else, and I don't bring harm to the environment, and the environment is more than just air, water, and wind, think about everything. Your city, your household, your child's life, the environment in your household, in your house. Think of all of those things. And if there's no negativity, then you have something that's positive. But once again, immorality is the breaking of the rules, and the rules are what keep us safe. But continuing on, it says, on the other hand, moral behavior can be defined as having respect for life, yours, and others. And remember, respecting yourself first, property, and the environment. Hollywood, as its negative influences, has become society's role model. Without the teaching of moral character education, it would be impossible to raise positive moral children in today's world. So now, right here is where we're going to find we have another procedure. Starting with all modern day parenting, that is procedure 6. So if you look back over to your procedures, looking back over to lesson plan 2B, it says, lead a class discussion, we're going to be in 6. 6, ask students, what do all positive, effective parents have in common? Paraphrase the first paragraph on page 12. So you see here the first paragraph on page 12. That's something we've already read. Emphasize and expound on the 3 common traits. Explain that positive parenting does not stop there. The traits are only the foundation. They will learn about many other traits, skills, and knowledge essential to positive parenting. So once again, recognizing this is the foundation, you realize this is a form of self-control we're teaching, because self-control is the foundation of all moral, positive character behavior. So looking back here on page 12, we've read that first paragraph, and then looking in, or the phrase there at the top, and looking here to the paragraph, it says, although modern day parenting is filled with new challenges that our ancestors did not have, the elements of positive, effective parenting have remained basically the same since the beginning of time. When you think back to it, these things didn't exist when I was a child, not even heard of, and microwaves didn't exist. All of these common things, color TVs, the way TVs are today, all of that, having a phone that you could walk away from the wall. And I remember my grandmother had a phone. It wasn't being used at that time, but she said she used it growing up, where it just had the little black dial and a little black receiver, and you had to spin the little dial and tell the lady, hey, plug me into this person. And the way it worked, there's a lot of older shows that I remember seeing these things on growing up. But even the telephones, and when you think around, just 100 years ago, if you go back 150 years ago, all of these hospitals, all of this, the railway trains and the way ships bring commerce and all of the deliveries that come in, airplanes flying everywhere. When you think about all of the things going on today, none of that existed. And with all of those things have come an abundance of technology to where you can take an enormous amount of information and put it on a little thumb drive. And you can use that. Well, think about as your child's mind being that prime, piece of real estate, if you want to. We talked about development, and there's nothing there. It's clear. It's and just try to look at it. If you've tried to live a healthy life as a parent, it should be untainted. But sadly, some children are born, as the author used to say, with one foot in the grave because of some bad habits, ancestral habits, from either the parents, the grandparents, or things that have led down. We're going to stop right here because we really need to cover all this at one time in our next class, where we're going to talk about the challenges that parents face. But think about, what we covered, what really loving a child is, taking care of them, and what you offer them. And we're going to get into the educational part. And the next class, we're really going to get into, when we make a mistake, we have to acknowledge that we made a mistake and then change the mistake we made. And we have to really look at it as a life depends on it, because it truly does. So our next class is going to be this coming Wednesday. That'll be May 7th, and we'll start back up at 5:30 p.m. Thank all of you for joining us once again.